Hello, welcome to Flame On. I'm Bryan. I'm here to talk about comics, mostly queer. As some of you longtime viewers and listeners know, I've been doing this interview series every Monday, and today I am really pleased to welcome someone whose work I was basically introduced to about a month ago, maybe. I'm going to butcher your name, I know it. Stéphane Côté?
You got it.
Woohoo! Yes. Welcome to Flame On.
Thank you.
It is a pleasure having now fully digested Phantasmagoria. It is exciting to talk to you. For our readers, our listeners, our viewers, we have so many different channels at this point. I don't even know which is which. If you have not already heard me talk about Phantasmagoria, I will refer you back to a Comic Book Bears, the other show I do. It actually just came out as a podcast this week, but we have it on our YouTube channels and all that, where I did go into a little bit of Volume 1. But that was early days, and now having finished the whole work, I am steeped in this. But enough about this. Stéphane, it is lovely. You are in Montreal, correct?
Exactly.
So I would like to find out a lot of information now, kind of about how you got to where you are with Phantasmagoria. And so I think we should just start at the beginning. Tell me how you got into cartooning.
Well, I've been drawing all my life. Seriously, cartooning came about, I would say, when I started doing Phantasmagoria, it was around 2007. That's when I decided it had to be a comic book. This is a labor of love for me. That's the first way I always describe it, because it's been living with me since my early teens. It's Phantasmagoria lives by its name because it's like a sequence of dreamlike images, and that's what it was ever since I was a teenager. I just had all these images, these bits of music, and I put it all together, and it became what it is today. All that to say, I seriously started doing this comic in 2007, and I finally released it about 8 years later, so in 2015.
So was it released over the course of that period? Because I know there's 8, I guess you would kind of consider them floppies or individual issues, and 2 collections, trade paperbacks. Like, did they come out sequentially, or did you kind of get them all in the can and go, all right, here it is?
The latter. So basically, here it is. Once I considered doing a little bit at a time, but then I said, you know what, I'm just going to do it all in one piece. My ultimate goal was to actually have Volume 1 and what is Volume 2 in one complete work and deliver that. However, for timing's sake, I just wanted people to have something. So that's why the first 4 books, which is Volume 1, came out first.
Okay. And you worked on this over the course of that period, but I know the roots of this, like you said, go way back. I know from the intro in Volume 1, you talk about an essay that you had to write in your I think it was college you were working. You had to write this piece. And then you also had roots and things that pulled from some of your music background and theatrical background. So, like, talk about, I guess, some of the first pieces and how they how the Phantasmagoria sort of evolved and transformed through those pieces.
So one of the reasons why this work is so special is because it was born the year I came out. So basically, back in '93, I was in what they call CJEP here, which is college. I wrote an essay. It was part of a minorities class, and we had to write what we knew, or maybe someone we knew who was a minority. And so I had just come out, maybe like a month or 2 prior, and the story kind of just developed. I had kind of written a few songs before then in my life, but everything just became like the poetry, the music, the story all came together. And once the teacher actually liked the essay, so I was kind of impressed with that. And after that, this was just like if you read the essay, you'd be like, what the hell is this? What did he smoke? But basically, it was very, very just a smidgen of what Phantasmagoria became in years to come afterwards. So it started as an essay, but it became a labor of love throughout years and years of living with it, basically.
So for those, obviously, who are not familiar with this piece, it is a post-apocalyptic exploration of the area in and around Montreal, which, by the way, having never been to Montreal, which is something I need to rectify once travel is allowed, again, and countries like yours will let us Americans in.
I'm sure we will.
At some point, having now moved to Seattle and having the border so much closer than it was when I was in Florida, I'm very excited about this prospect. But Montreal, you do such a good job, I believe, for like weaving in like real Montreal and into this landscape, which is post-apocalyptic and obviously transformed it completely. But I do love when pieces like Phantasmagoria have a grounding in real places. I like fantastic places and imaginary. All that's fine, but especially when it can ground that in. So, like, obviously, you've been in Montreal for some time, right?
Oh yeah, ever since I was like 20, so basically 25 years. I'm on the North Shore now. I'm a suburban. However, my heart is still Montreal. Like, we consider it to be Montreal. I love that city.
But I mean, that love comes through. So was that always important in this piece? Were you really trying to sort of bring the spirit of that city and sort of really like, tie it to that location? Or did that just sort of fall out from the fact that you were there and you wanted to, talk about what you knew?
There's that, but it was also, it's almost like the city becomes a character. Maybe one day I'll release this, but there's like a prequel part. There's not enough prequels in this book, right? But there's an actual prequel of the character Dee, who comes to Montreal, and there's a song for her, and it's called Montreal, basically. So maybe that'll come out one day if I have the patience to create it. But basically, the city is a character in itself, and obviously, like you say, it is transformed. And I'm sorry you have to see it in this post-apocalyptic way, but it's very special to me.
Well, it's clear, and I guess I always appreciate that the verisimilitude of imaginary world, post-apocalyptic, Montreal, but again rooted in real Montreal. So speaking of prequels, and this is an interesting aspect to Phantasmagoria, the storytelling choices are very I won't say complicated, but there's definitely a lot of jumping around. And one of my favorite parts there's a couple places and ways you do this that I love. One of them is the story of the Widdenworths, which in my American brain, every time I see Widdenworths, I think Woolworths.
Yeah.
Because, growing up, Woolworths and then later Walgreens and CVS, but specifically Woolworths was such a staple of our, younger years. And I'm basically, I think, really close to your age. I graduated high school in 95, started college in 95. So, I'm right there in the ballpark here. And were Woolworths a thing in Canada as well? Or is that something that you just drew from?
I remember we had one in our neighborhood. It didn't last too long, though, because Walmart and all these other big chains came out and kind of killed it. But I remember for a few years, it was in the neighborhood.
So so Widdenworth and the cartoon sort of like it's more so your cartooning style changes quite a lot throughout the series, which is interesting, and that's I think really helpful, especially if you're trying to track like, okay, this is that, and now we're jumping here, and these are these, So the time frames have a very distinct style, and the Widdenworth pieces they're almost more like a comic strip from a paper, a very like single page, black and white, a little sketchier than your Phantasmagoria stuff. What made you decide to explore and then we'll talk about the other diversions you take, but how did you get to the decision to like start to explore this world from all of these different styles and perspectives?
Well, two things. I think first of all, the Widdenworths is all about Jezebel's growing up phase, Jezebel being the main character or one of the main characters in the book. And Jezebel's always been very special to me because it's my way of living vicariously through her. She's such an over-the-top, strange, weird, wicked character. And of course, like, I'd never do what she does, but it's just fun to write her. Like, I miss her. Like, I love writing her. I love drawing her. And I had to find out, how does this person get so crazy, right? And to go back into her youth and to kind of give glimpses of, oh, well, maybe it came from her mom. Maybe it came from her dad. Maybe it came from her upbringing and the craziness that ensues there. And that was the main part. The other part, obviously, I was heavily influenced by Watchmen. That book changed my life. It's my one of my favorite books of all time, like many. But for the reason of it blew me away when I was all of a sudden thinking it's one thing, and then you turn the page and it's like, I'm on a pirate ship. What the hell's going on? And you need patience. And I applaud you for actually reading my book, because I have one cousin who said, I don't understand. And it's like, you have to have a kind of take a step back and say, okay, where am I going now? And reread and kind of go back and then go back forward. And I love that journey of not knowing where the book's going to take you. Like, those are my favorite kind of books to read and to write.
It's interesting you say Watchmen, because there's an amount of a density of story that I know some readers, you're right, would just be like, nope, too much, can't figure this out. But with pieces like yours and Watchmen and others, of course, like the reason is there, and you almost have to trust that the author or cartoonist or creator, whoever, is doing this for a reason. It's not literally just a diversion. Though there is one diversion, like we'll talk about the is it Tales from the Affected, I believe. We'll come back to that though. But like, you're right, and it did inform me as a reader of Jezebel, formerly Jane, like her story. I think the piece works well without that. Like, you don't need it, but I appreciated it, and I especially appreciated that it was in that very distinct format. And same thing with Watchmen, like you said, it's got that the pirate story, or gosh, it's been a while.
The Black Freighter.
The Black Freighter. Oh,
Yeah.
thank you for reminding me. And I need to revisit Watchmen after
Me
having
too.
finished the sequel TV show.
Yes.
There's certainly parts where I'm like, wait a minute. Anyway, we could have a whole thing about Watchmen. That'd be great.
Oh, so good.
So yeah, I did appreciate that stuff. So let's talk about Tales of the Affected, because whereas Widdenworth's, I think, does inform the story, it informs the character, specifically of Jane or Jezebel. But Tales of the Affected is almost more of a true diversion that you're using as a way to sort of say, well, we're focused over here in bedside. I'm going to say it wrong. Bedside Manor.
Yeah.
But by the way, all of these other things are happening in the world around you, and this is like kind of a sort of cute way to like soften that up and give you like little vignettes about these sort of, for lack of a better terminology, I mean, affected is a great choice, but like zombie, mutants, whatever trope you want to use of the post-apocalyptic landscape. So why did you decide to work in that Tales of the Unaffected? Was it to sort of soften the mood, or was it just to kind of give a little bit of a palate cleanser before each episode?
For me, it was all about, again, I wrote this. The first volume took a longer time to write. The second volume, I kind of wrote a little bit quicker because I had more of a hands-on approach, like I'd gotten my style in check. However, by the time I started the book to by the time I ended the second one, I was a little bit frustrated with the fact that there was so much post-apocalyptica going on, and I was like, is my book coming out? Like, is it just going to be like just another post-apocalyptic work? And then I said, you know what, just go ahead with it. The reason why Affected was something I wanted to include was I was tired of seeing zombies as just being brainless, even though I know they are. But in my book, I wanted them to be former people who were just trying to survive in what was now the world. You might remember this. You might be a little bit too young, but in 83, 84, there was this really horrifying TV movie called The Day After.
Of course, yep.
I wasn't even allowed to watch it, but I remember seeing like clips, and I had nightmares for years.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember seeing people struggling and surviving after the nuclear blast hits the United States, right? And that really affected me, no pun intended. And basically, I was trying to see like, okay, well, I don't want to just do zombies like everyone else is doing zombies. How would these people be living right now? And yeah, some of them are maybe far gone and you can't reach them anymore, like you see at the end of the book. Some of them, those still have a lot of heart and mind.
Yeah, and I mean, you definitely give those little, and so this format is different from Widdenworth's in that it is, I think it's colored, but it's done in your cartooning style changes drastically among these different things, and this one, kind of like Widdenworth's, is a little more, in the Scott McCloud, cartooning spectrum, maybe a little more to the simple, abstract cartooning style. Yeah. So I think it works well, and again, I like it as a palate cleanser just to kind of reset. between the somewhat more intense story within the main Phantasmagoria, the story of Feli, and Obsidian and Jezebel and all of the cast characters, which, by the way, oh my god. So you do eventually, I think, I forgot where it is, but you give the head sheet or the cast sheet of all the different characters. And like, I really appreciate when artists or when creators give me that, which you did. It helps a lot. It helps so much. But also you give several times, in fact, I believe, but I know at least once, and I'm going to pull some artwork up here in a second and share it on the live stream here. You give the cutaway layout of like Bedside Manor,
yes,
or of the area surrounding. Like you give geography, which some people are just into map porn. Like some people just, that's like a thing. I myself am one of those people. But when you're trying to really show the world, you do need to have some context. And sometimes when you get down in the dirt of storytelling, you don't always have time to tell that, to explain that in a way that's organic. So I love that you've included those.
Thanks.
I think you probably did it for a practical reason, but also because these are things that we've all seen in different books over the years. But did you have, like, as you were creating these characters and you were trying to figure all this out, did you have trouble like figuring out, okay, well, how am I going to really make sure these characters are like really distinct, which I think you do accomplish, but also then the just the navigating the world. How did you tackle that in other ways?
It was a natural process. The first book was all about when I was writing it, the process was a little bit more simple. You could see that there's lacks of continuity sometimes, which I'm still proud of because I was kind of like finalizing my style. Because sometimes you're like, she doesn't quite look like herself anymore, but it's okay, it still works. But it's very simple. By the time I got to volume 2, I was a little bit more used to it. However, again, I was so submerged into this world that I myself wanted to know, okay, wait a minute, if I take down this particular avenue, what is at the end of there? And you have this particular former club or this hotel and this and that. So I had to draw it down for myself to kind of have a roadmap, to have a blueprint. And I think it helps, obviously, the readers as well, because by the time volume 2 kicks in, we kind of start to see all the other surrounding characters that were quiet in the first volume that now have voices. So I wanted to give them a little bit more room. And I also wanted to show everybody where they lived.
Yeah, I can totally see how as a creator yourself, it helps to like have this written down. I've certainly my boyfriend is working on a piece and had to like sit there and draw out something that his story needed just to figure out the geography.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, when you can make that available as another artifact or as another piece of the world to the viewer, to the reader, or to the person having the experience, I think it's always helpful. So let me pull up a couple real quick screenshots before I get too far into other things. I love this one. This is of the clock tower, which let me see if I can make that a little bigger. I don't know. I'm using the ebook, and it's like, it's kind of the ebook reader I got is pretty horrible. But anyway, you can see though so you started cartooning in 2007. Is that what you said?
Sorry, I started the book in 2007.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I mean, you've undertaken quite an effort. This is obviously, like you said, a labor of love. But like, I love shots like this because you use a color palette that is not traditional for post-apocalyptic landscapes, but I feel like does capture your sort of the Phantasmagoria, the sort of Moulin Rouge, the sort of like heightened experience that is happening in this world, this sort of isolated pocket of humanity as it has become this refuge. It fits that world really well. But again, contrasting with the sort of, I guess you could say this is like the nuclear glow.
It is, exactly.
So it works for both, right? I also let me pick another screen here. I'm going through a couple of these. And if there's anything you want to add to, what I'm, please.
Well, the clock tower is interesting because first of all, it exists. It's a beautiful place in Montreal. And it's actually I wanted to really put it in there because my boyfriend and I, we've been together 15 years, and that was one of our first dates. It was going up the clock tower, and it was very special to me, and I wanted to be in there.
Oh, that's so nice. I again, now when I come up there, I'll have to look for this clock
Oh
tower
yeah,
and be like,
it's
oh my
easy to
God.
find. Yeah.
And then this one gets lost a little bit, unfortunately, and I can't figure quite out how to zoom, although there does seem to be a way to do it. You've got all of these cute, and so I love this trope too, and I'm sure you've seen it in other things, where you kind of make puns about the different names of the places in the world you're building. So Love and Muffins, Jack Off the Jester. I mean, now Dizzy Dot's something that's kind of its own thing, right? That club plays quite a central role to your story. Is
Yeah.
that based on any bar, or is that based on a specific kind of place that's near to you, or is that completely contrived?
Well, Montreal is historically is a very burlesque city. It had a huge vaudeville burlesque scene back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and I've always loved that part of Montreal, and there's still a lot of historic sites that exist today. And I wanted to kind of pay tribute to that.
Okay. And yeah, that's the DNA of burlesque certainly is there. I mean, I was talking about Jezebel again, my boyfriend, and I was like Jezebel, because I think there was some confusion at first, just from like quick glance. Oh, it's drag queen. It's like no, more like a burlesque performer, hostess, but drag
Yeah,
nonetheless.
absolutely. Oh
And
yeah.
it's funny. The timing of this is great because I have just finished Drag Race Canada,
Yes.
so I have gotten to know a little bit more about your country's drag, which even though, especially now, I'm a lot closer. It was never something that I was necessarily like, oh, so and so from like Rita Baga is a great example, a brilliant
Love her. Oh,
Quebecois queen. Is she Montreal as well, or is she Quebec?
yes.
She's Montreal.
Montreal. Yeah.
Um, yeah, brilliant, and it's so funny because every time I talk about her, I talk about my friend Chad Divine Grace from Orlando because I feel like they're lost, they're cousins, they're like distant cousins, or blood sisters, whatever. But yeah, drag and Jezebel, it has kind of an interesting relationship, and I guess you saying burlesque makes a lot of sense. When you were in theater and doing cabaret work, was that part of your sort of staging? Like, did you work in burlesque, or were you kind of adjacent to it?
Kind of. We did tributes to cabaret, things like that. It was very watered down. Like I can't say that I was ever on that scene. However, we did have a cabaret act where we did a lot of covers and things like that. And we did do the Jezebel Ball. There was actually, it was part of our numbers, so I was very proud of that. And the girl I used to sing with played Jezebel.
So the Jezebel Ball evolved as an idea from your actual, stage and your music, which we'll get to your music too. Oh, by the way, there's also an active, a rich soundtrack to this piece that you can get for free on your website. So, I mean, that's another extra layer of excitement with all this work, right? Which is something else that I always had dreamed about if I ever, have, eventually someday getting into my own graphic novel work, comics work. That was always something I was like, oh yeah, I gotta have music with it. You gotta have music.
Oh yeah.
So I love that you did that. But yeah, just like the relationship with your theatrical time, were you workshopping like ideas through some of that, and then, or was it just that, oh yeah, we did this thing, I'm gonna kind of bring that DNA back into what I'm building? How did that all kind of work together?
In my head, when I started writing the Fantasmagoria, after it was an essay, in my head it was going to be an animated movie. And I'm still dreaming one day, Ryan Murphy, I'm calling you. I want to do an animated feature, kind of like a Walt Disney, but more for adults with music. And I don't know if you've ever seen Rock and Roll.
No, I saw you mention that, and I have not seen it. Okay, I'll have to look for that.
Early 80s, it has Blondie, Earth, Wind and Fire, Cheap Trick, Iggy Pop. And it's Canadian, like who would have thunk it? But it was an amazing animated feature that was more adult. Like they swear, it's kind of sexual, sensual, and the vibe of it totally inspired me for Fantasmagoria. And when I wrote Fantasmagoria, it was a tribute to that, but very inspired by it. And so when I started doing music more, I kind of tested out my songs, and I wrote a lot of my songs during that time that ended up being in Fantasmagoria as a final work. Some of them weren't meant to be at first, but I liked them so much that I kind of plugged them in.
Well, I am putting a link to your website with specifically the videos that have the music going along. So if anyone's watching, we'll get this all linked up after as well. But it's really interesting because some of the comic does feel like very much like a music video, specifically kind of like a lyric video, but actually depicting scenes from what's the action. So it's sort of in between. But the lyrics are featured prominently in the art. And then listening to it, you can also get that. So it is a nice, like, I love that multimedia in its purest sense, like, but uniquely comics, which is sometimes it's like, oh, well, yeah, animated this or a movie. It's like, yeah, that's not the same. Comics is different. And the fact that you can link that in to something else that's very intimate, I think, to a listener, it worked out well. So when did you start being, were you a musician prior, or when did you start getting into music?
I mean, like most people, I've always loved music. Art came first. I've always drawn. My mom says I drew as soon as I was born, basically. So I've always been drawing. However, music came around when I was about 20 until I was about 30. And I'm not the best singer. I'm not the best musician. However, I really love the melodies I did create, and I had to put them out into the world. So the story can live by itself. You don't need the music, but I think for those people who like Fantasmagoria, they appreciate that added layer of musicality. And for me, it's just another piece of my soul. It's a lot of the lyrics shaped the story. The Jezebel Ball was the first poem / musical piece I wrote when I was writing the essay, and it really shaped the story. It's sensual. I was at a total time of sexual self-discovery at that point. I was coming out. I was very naive and innocent as well. So it's kind of like, what can the world be? And I'm kind of interested in that, but am I? So there's a lot of that in Feli's journey and in the music as well.
So what we're talking about specifically with the music overlapping with the comic is, as you can see on this page, bottom right, that is the icon, the graphic you've used. Anytime that there is correlation, you refer, the reader back to your website or back to get that audio experience. And I like that. It's very helpful. Though, I mean, if you didn't do that, someone who's just following along could figure it out. But it's a nice reminder, especially if they just jump in midstream and forget about it.
Well, you remember those Disney books we had as kids that had the vinyl record?
Yep.
Right? And then Tinkerbell, you'd hear like, diddling, and then it meant turn the page. So I wanted to kind of do a little wink and a nod to that, basically.
I like it. And it's funny you say that because I used to have those albums and I had just completely forgotten that was the thing you did. But you're right. You would get the vinyl and the book and you sit there and flip through it and then you'd have the icon. That's so great.
Yeah.
So yeah, music-wise, so you sing do you sing all the tracks or is there any other? Okay, so that's all you, and you're doing the instruments as well?
Instruments. Well, I use GarageBand. So here's the thing. When I was doing music back then, I had to work with musicians because I did try to study music a little bit, but I don't think my brain's set up for that. And when things like GarageBand came out, I was like, holy crap, I can do this myself and go even further than I thought. So again, it's still a work in progress. I'm going to be doing it for my next book as well. But it's so much fun. It's another outlet for me. And for me, it's just another extension of the story.
Wow, that's impressive. And yeah, so I teach music technology, or at least in a past life, I taught it. And I was sort of teaching before GarageBand, and then I was teaching when GarageBand came out.
Yeah.
And what I regret to this day is that we didn't just immediately all in on GarageBand, because it truly does, like you said, give a platform for creating music that so many people just wouldn't take the time to learn, like Pro Tools or Reactor or whatever other fancy software, that they just didn't have that. And then suddenly Apple's like, oh, here you go. And it's like a great tool. So that's really cool that you use that. Throughout the work, you also have these really cool, and I think sometimes they're obviously satire, advertising for Widdenworths, but then occasionally you do like one of these pieces that I assume is a real place.
Yes.
Le plot de Pierre. I mean, French is horrible.
What you just said is actually really dirty. I won't be. I'm teasing.
I mean, that wouldn't shock me.
No, it's fine. Les plats de Pierre. You're very close. You're very close.
I literally took French for, I think it was a year in high school. My last name is Pitard, so like I have French something in there, but it was just like a year in high school, and then I kind of ran away screaming. Not because I didn't like it, but just for whatever reason, I kind of moved on to Japanese. But no, I thank you for. But this is a real place. This is a place in Montreal.
Yes, it's basically a very up and coming old neighborhood that's now new again, called Griffintown. And I wanted the restaurant to take place there because when I was writing this, it was the place to be in Montreal.
And again, I think that goes back to the earlier thing where you're really making the city a part of the story in an intimate way, making it its own character, grounding it. All of that I think is really helpful. And like I said, I just love seeing that. I did want to show a couple more things here. This is the style that you did for like the Tales of the Affected. So you can see kind of got a little Tim Burton vibe going.
Oh yeah, for sure.
With this cartooning, but again, this just one page, very straightforward little mini story, rounds out the world, which I do appreciate. And then let me find one of the Widdenworths, so you can kind of get a contrast for those of our readers who are curious. And of course, I'm not going to find one, even though they're throughout the work. You know, anyway, I'll find one eventually. But gosh, we've covered so much ground. So let's talk about the main love triangle. And it's really not just a triangle. It's kind of a quadrilogram, right?
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it.
It starts out very triangular, and then you add in this character, Mexi, who I do want to talk about as well. Because clearly Mexi is like this Ziggy Stardust-esque.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we start with Feli and Pierre. Mm-hmm. Who are lovers in the before times, as we call, I guess, the pre-apocalypse now.
Exactly.
Feli gets separated from Pierre after, not a great moment in their relationship, but they get separated because of the chaos of the apocalypse. The Feli falls in with this group that ends up going to Bedside Manor, meets Obsidian, who is this sort of I was reminded with Obsidian of Rocky Horror and the Meatloaf character whose name I can't remember now. Eddie? I think it's Eddie. So is that sort of the DNA that you were going for with the hunk, the bear-ish figure in this book?
Well, just to give you a little bit of background on him, when I wrote the essay, my professor had written, I don't like the way, she said, I love the story, but I don't agree with the way you ended it. However, I do understand why you did, but Feli should not end up with a hunk. And so that always stuck with me. And as I was writing it, it was going to have a much happier ending, not to disclose anything. But at some point I was like, you know what? I think I need to twist this up a little bit so that it's not just a more realistic way, but kind of like a Shakespearean tragedy, much more operatic, basically. And so Obsidian became something completely different. And I had a lot of fun writing him. And again, like Jezebel, finding out what makes him tick, because he's a very enraged character. He's got anger issues, but he's also, he's got a lot of heart, but he just doesn't know how to show it.
Yeah, he's complicated, which, I mean, anytime you're writing, whether it's a hero or a villain, I think it needs to have complexity, right? Oh, God, we were watching something the other day, and I'm like, oh, my God, this is how you'd really show a villain. You give them their own true motivation, because no villain is a villain in their own head, right?
No.
And not that Obsidian's not a villain, but certainly Obsidian makes choices in his relationship with Feli. And this is the quickest one, the first one I found. You can see the tattoos. With tattoo work is very nice. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And this is early in the story when you first meet him. So I mean, he's not the refined brute that we come to know him as. But yeah, I guess that's an interesting idea that you're like that your teacher sort of put out there, which is no, Feli should not end up with the brute or with the hunk. And so I am interested kind of to know then, like the arc that you took him through. Did you have to turn him up into more villainous of a person, or did you kind of subdue that or mellow that with the Mexi kind of relationship?
Mexi was actually a surprise character. He wasn't going to exist until I started getting into volume 2. So basically, I knew that the moment when I seriously got into writing Phantasmagoria as a graphic novel or a comic, what I said is like, okay, this is the way the story is going to go. I knew how it was going to end between Feli and Obsidian. And then I kind of liked the reverse engineering process. And there was a general arc. But what I love about writing is that there's a lot of last minute additions. I'd be a terrible director because I'd always be like, wait, let's add this. Seriously. So I was always adding like these little bits and pieces to make it more realistic in my head. Like if he was talking to me right now, what would he be saying? I hope that makes sense.
No, I think it totally makes sense, and it's that embroidery of characters as they start to have their own lives. That you realize things and go, oh wait, actually no, that doesn't make sense. They need to do
exactly.
This. I did find a couple other pieces I want to show here in a second, but I don't want to move off of Obsidian just yet. Was Obsidian named? I know why Obsidian. I know what Obsidian is, and he talks about it in the comic. But was Obsidian a reference to anything outside of this? Maybe a DC character of any? I don't know how much you talk about Watchmen, so I know you're from comics perspective.
A little bit. I've always been very into druids, which I'm going to explore into my next book. And my favorite precious stone has always been obsidian, which is not really a precious stone. It's actually volcanic rock, right? And I feel the name just fit the character. And when you find out more about him, you find out why he's named that. But I thought it was a nice kind of hippie name that his mom could have chosen for him, basically. But I just love that word, that name.
I was definitely, in the way my brain works, Obsidian, I see that in a comic, and as soon as I see that, I think DC, gay character, like just the way my brain works. But we haven't talked a lot about the queer elements in this book, which, being that this is a queer podcast, I think that's hopefully understood at this point, but you never know. But
you know what? That's what I wanted. When I wrote the book, it's more about, it's not placing it especially as this is only labeled as this. There's a mixed bag in here. Like there's a lot of characters, which is my life and your life too. Like it's not just about one type of person, right? It's about all these rich people that make your life what it is. So. Oh,
absolutely. It's a true ensemble piece in all of the ways. And in a nice way that, you have a natural diversity. I know there's a ongoing topic right now, increasing diversity, getting more authentic representation in comics and all, and in any media, but specifically comics in this context. And your work, because I think the community that you just are in, that just comes through. You get these really authentic stories from characters, some of which are twisted and sort of mutated and affected in their own ways, but you have a diversity there, which is good, both in gender and in ethnicity. I believe what's Sakim or Hakim or Sam
Kareem,
Kareem.
Yeah.
Sorry, because I know there's like this joke in the book too about like the name. Anyway, but yeah. So and other characters, and then of course heterosexual, homosexual. You get all that in there, which is really nice. I did find a couple more pages here. This is a good example of the Whittenworth sort of style. So, are they all 9-panel? If they are, I didn't notice that.
No, It depends on what I was sharing. Some of them, I think there's one part, the last one has actually almost 12. Like, I think I had to do 2 pages for that one. Oh, okay. But they're not all 9 now.
Because I was just thinking back to Watchmen again. I was like, oh, wouldn't that be funny? Because I know some storytellers like Tom King, who does a lot of DC stuff now, they're all obsessed with the 9-panel again. It's like been brought back into this hallowed ground when it's like, yeah, okay, cool. I thought we got away from that, but it works. It's comics storytelling and panels. Obviously you've had to tackle this. The pacing of a book is directly related to how many panels you put out there, and you can speed up or slow down that tempo.
Absolutely.
That. Which you do play with that, which is good. Here's a good shot of Jezebel, who I want to show, because this is like one of those, single page sort of pieces. That is, yeah, like before Trixie Mattel was even Trixie Mattel. I mean, you've rendered this character is such a, what is it that Trixie talks about? She paints for the cheap seats, And I think that's a burlesque thing more than anything, right?
Yeah, and it was funny because only after I finished drawing and finished publishing my books, I realized one of the first characters I ever drew first when I was like 6 or 7, one of the characters I ever started learning to draw, those books that told you like how to draw Superman. Well, one of the first characters I ever learned to draw was Bugs Bunny.
Oh, yeah.
And when I look at her and I look at Bugs Bunny, the eyes are the same. And I remember drawing that shape and I'm like, holy crap, it's Bugs Bunny. The opera episode.
Yes. Well, that's the thing. I talk about this where I'm like, when I knew certain things, and that episode from it's like the Valkyries, right?
Yes. Yes.
The ring cycle. And yeah, like one of the first characters I can think of in my young childhood who I saw do drag.
Yeah.
And as a trope, I mean, other straight or other heterosexual, it pops up here and there. But like Bugs Bunny was so important to me. Mm-hmm. And it was really a great moment for me. So yeah, I understand why it would imprint, so heavily at that.
Yeah.
So let's go back to Mexi, because I don't think we gave Mexi their due.
I love that guy.
So I didn't get it at first. It took me a little bit, not to pick up the Bowie and all that, which I kind of was like, okay. But like Mexi is complicated, and you bring in magic through Mexi, and you introduce the fourth part of the quadrilogram, because you have Pierre and Feli, and of course they're separated, and we don't know what happened to Pierre exactly at first. Mm-hmm. And then you have Obsidian come in, and Obsidian loves Feli, and so that's a thing. And then Feli is still hung up on Pierre, but then you bring in Mexi, and Mexi's hung up on Obsidian. So you get this great classic, soap opera kind of trope. What surprised you the most about Mexi? You said that Mexi was sort of a surprise character. Like what surprised you about him?
Well, as I was writing my story and as it was coming to a close, I was like, there was something missing, and it was Mexi. And I feel that just the love triangle between Pierre and Feli and Obsidian, and sometimes Jezebel, wasn't enough. I just needed more humor, because it was also getting very dark. Very dark. And I'm not a dark person, but I appreciate dark things. But I felt the story was going down a very dark avenue. And I said, you know what, we need light. And so his hair lights up and changes colors, and he's just crazy. And he's almost like an extraterrestrial. Like, what is he? And I like those questions. There's a lot unanswered about him. We don't know what happens to him, but he brings a lot to the story, and he's one of the main reasons why the story takes a different turn. And I loved writing him.
Yeah, I was trying to find a really good picture of Mexi to depict, but I, of course, am struggling. But it makes more sense when you say that, though, because Mexi, it is such a cipher and such a mysterious character, and it does transform the story in a way. And you reminded me when you brought in Jezebel to the love triangle. I'm like, oh God, that's right. We've got Jezebel's baby, which that whole thing, and I'm like, because actually I think I spoiled myself slightly by looking at the character roster before that character.
Okay.
And I'm like, what is that? Interesting child with the face of a rat. So yeah, no, I think I will say that Fantasmagoria in a lot of ways it operates on dream logic, not exclusively, but a lot of very not even like not logical, but just very impressionistic beats. And I can understand again why some people might just be like, oh gosh, I need to grab onto something, and that makes sense. But it's such a nice reverie in this world. Even having moments where Satan shows up in a dungeon to whip the main character. Like, that was one of those things I showed my boyfriend, and I'm like, what? I mean, it was hot. Like, I'm not going to say it was very, very like sexual to say the least, considering, you know,
But he's crazy.
but he's crazy. Yeah, no, and that's in the Jezebel Ball, which again, I think I'm trying to think of another work that has that kind of moment. To one simpler kind of analogy, you'd have like the field of poppies in Wizard of Oz. Mm-hmm. It's not quite a dream, and it's not quite just a drug orgy, but it's like all in one. That you're so you said earlier that was inspired by sort of your coming out and like sort of early sexual exploration.
Yeah, so picture this, 1992, 1993. So I came out in 93. Madonna's erotica was a huge inspiration for me because I grew up Catholic, and Madonna at that point was at her peak and very controversial. So if you were a fan of Madonna, you were also a fan of her lifestyle and what she represented, which for a lot of people was like women's lib. And for a lot of people, it was, they found that she was going too far with nudity and things like that. And when you look back at it today, it's like, actually, it's quite artistic and tame. But I remember all of her videos were banned, right? So when I got that album, I was like, I kind of felt naughty. And I remember when I listened to it, I love that album. It's a very special album. And I love the rhythm to it and all that. And that's when the Jezebel Ball was born, very inspired by that. And all the, remember she had her erotica book?
Oh yeah, one of my exes had it. So I'm very familiar with that whole time, and yes.
Yeah. And that's it. And it was like
the jockstrap, the one photo I think from that book with her biting the jockstrap, kind of like the dog pulling the underwear off the Coppertone child. Like that was super hot, like early for me.
And she was very. When you look at it, it was absolutely stunning. And that's for me was like, okay, how can you can have beauty and this sexuality, which is sometimes very dark, sometimes playful. And this is where, like, I used Felly at that point as a vehicle to explore all these things. But obviously at that point I was 18 and discovering life as well.
So I found the my one of probably my favorite characters at this point. And he does come back later, from what I remember, later in the series. And there's some delightful cartooning. You know, hopefully we're not spoiling too much, but giving people specifics that they might be intrigued by. Where I think it's Mexi, Obsidian, and one other character who I forgot. And they're
Sam.
all...
Yeah.
Oh, who is it?
Sam.
And and they have recently been spanked, and you give their asses a lovely reddish hue. I think I laughed out loud when I got to that page.
They were bad boys.
They were being punished clearly, and I'm sure they hated every second of it, right? Although you don't do this often, but you do in that case give them like little thought bubbles, and they're just a little emoji or graphic that kind of gives you their emotional state at that moment, which is great. But anyway, what is this character's name? I don't even know. Did you name this character?
He was. Oh my God, I actually forgot. Hold on.
Because I don't.
He's got an original. He's called the Master. But
well, okay.
I gave him a name because he has his own gym.
Oh yes. Well, whatever his name is, I think he deserves his own spin-off series. I'm just gonna say, if you ever wanted to get into the BDSM erotica, whatever comics, I think clearly the Master here and Tom of Finland are going to have great adventures. I mean, it's really good.
He's very much that, for sure.
Were you influenced? We only have a little bit of time left, but were you influenced by like Tom of Finland or some of the early queer comics that came out, like gay comics, or early? What this is a better way to do it. What was your first like queer comic experience that you had?
I think, like you said, like looking at things like Bugs Bunny. I think growing up gay when you weren't allowed to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, there wasn't a lot. Like, I can't remember anything going back. Like, you're always hoping that things would happen, but it wasn't that world. So honestly, I had to make my own, and that's where Fantasmagoria was born, because I wanted to write a story that didn't exist. By the time it came out, there's a lot more stories that have come out ever since, and we've been blessed with, like, you know, TV series like Will and Grace and things like that that changed the face of entertainment. However, back when I was growing up, honestly, I think it was the lack of gay literature that I was exposed to. The first gay books I ever really loved and read were Tales of the City. But in terms of comics, I have to say that no, it was pretty dry for me. And that's why I wanted to create my own.
It's interesting because I've been doing this series and talking to queer creators and queer Justin Hall last week from No Straight Lines and many other things, and Annie Mangels from Gay Comics. Like, a lot of queer creators, I think that was their story too. Yep. They didn't have that representation in their lives, so they said, all right, well, I'm going to make it. But what's hilarious and interesting and sad in some ways, because I also was raised very religious, and had to come out, and it was a whole thing. And so I had to suppress a lot of the sexuality and all that. We didn't have access to that. And so, it makes sense that we would have this, but so many other people like ourselves were out there having that same experience and
absolutely
making amazing art that only got distributed in like really, really niche markets, independent comic. It took years. By the time you were making your queer comics, it was just starting to get out there into the mainstream. But again, it wasn't there. So I do always appreciate where the origins and the kind of the influences come from. Back to comics proper or wide though. Let me, before we wrap up here, like, what other comics do you like? Do you still read comics other than Watchmen? Like, what are you into?
I'm pretty, I don't read a lot of comics. I read a lot of whatever inspires me. There's two series that are very dear to me that are Siegfried by Alex Alice. Just the art is just like #goals for me. And Skydoll, which is one of my, it's not finished yet. It's a limited series, and I think they're still working on the next ones, but it's a series of this, I don't know if you know it, but it's a French comic that I think they produced it in English at some point. I'll have to send you a link, but it's one of the most beautiful works I've ever seen. It's a robotic sex doll that has kind of like a Pinocchio story. So she's trying to find out that she's really human. And it's just a beautiful piece of art. Like the artwork is just stunning, but the story is really zany and fun.
I had this gimmick idea at one point we were going to play with where a robot sex doll gets fucked sentient. And that's basically what it sounds like, which is a ridiculous concept. But
that's a good title.
Yeah, robot sex slave gets fucked. No. So, what are you working on next? I know you kind of alluded to some projects that you're working on. And Fantasmagoria, if we didn't already say, is a complete work. Though I'm sure there's plenty of places you could still explore in that world. But and they are both, by the way, they are still available on your website. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so then if that's, and we'll make sure that, again, that link gets out. What are you working on next?
So as much as I love doing Fantasmagoria, there's something else that I've always wanted to explore, which is fantasy, sword and sorcery, that type of thing. So my next work is called He Queens, and it's about people who were erased from history. And what if they had the strength and courage and population to fight back? So people like druids, Elagabalus, who was like the first trans or the only trans gay emperor in Rome, who was completely demonized. And when you read her story, it's like, actually, what if? I don't think it's that at all. I think this is what was really happening. But it comes back to the Churchill saying that people who have power are the ones who write history. And so I want to give a voice to people who need a voice in history that were never talked about, that we kind of have glimpses of. And there's a lot of literature out there, but it's time that we see it a little bit more now, and in a very fantasy legend kind of way. So very fun, very positive, but also to say, like, this is a story that has to be heard.
Oh, that's exciting. I really, again, referring back to Justin Hall, my interview preceding this, we talked about the sort of dearth for a while of trans comics, and now with web comics, many times over, that is a huge part of it. And in print, we really need to see more of this as well.
Absolutely.
And especially trans history, because a lot of it, like you said, has sort of been written by the victors and sort of erased.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about that. That's a really cool concept. And
Thank you.
I hope that gets to where it needs to be, and whenever that's ready to be launched, we'll definitely have you back on and talk more about it. Anything else? Oh, I know. Well, we'll put your website up, and I know there's social media links, but what's the easiest way for people to find your stuff out there right now? On
StéphaneCôtéArt.com. That's where everything lives, and you can find me on Instagram as well, Stéphane Côté Art 1. But the website's the easiest.
I know you are a master marketer on Instagram. I've learned so much from you alone. But yeah, we'll make sure this will actually be up on Instagram very relatively shortly, probably later tonight, because it'll be within the hour, because they have that stupid hour limit. Anyway.
That's okay.
But it'll be up on IGTV, and it'll be on YouTube and all the other platforms we're on. But Stéphane, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
I hope that some of our listeners and viewers check out your stuff, and I look forward to talking to you again.
You too. Thank you so much, and drive safe to Seattle.
Oh. Yeah, it is an anarchy city now, so who knows what could happen.
Be safe.
Thanks.